Well, today marks 50 years since the end of NASA's successful failure in Apollo 13. As we wrap up our Bradathon week, Dr. Brad Tucker and I dive into this Talking Science Story of the Week.
Across Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts and YouTube, this is Talking Science with Dr. Brad Tucker and Matt Miller.
Well, our last story of the week, Brad, is the 50th anniversary of Apollo 13. As people are watching our in-depth chat about this story, it is Friday, and Friday, April 17, is 50 years since they successfully splashed down back on Earth. But today on the main show, on Tuesday, is pretty much the day where the problems all started, about 2.5 days into the mission.
That's right. Just shy of 56 hours after the launch, they had the explosion when the oxygen tanks, which created everything. They now realize that oxygen tank 2. It was actually because there was Teflon coating inside that actually created the explosion, but everything was fairly smooth sailing. They had some issues with personnel launching, and a few kind of normal things that happened, so to speak. But it was that explosion that quickly made them think on their feet, as we say.
It's a fascinating story and a real lesson in the way lots of little problems can build up and lead to a catastrophic failure. I mean, the damaged oxygen tank that was installed was dropped on a factory floor years before Apollo 13 even lifted off from Cape Canaveral. You
didn't really think in the process of moving it, assembling it, that sort of thing. It was happened. It was an accident. I draw a lot of parallels. We talked about this hole in the International Space Station that appeared last year or maybe a year and a half ago, that astronauts were trying to figure out what happened, and they had to sticky tape it, and it appeared that someone was drilling because they could see the rivets, and that created a little hole and a puncture. That appeared to happen in the manufacturing stage, a simple accident. It didn't create the hole, but it fatigued the metal, and eventually over time it wore down. Little things go wrong because of the harsh conditions of space that these things go through.
It's really interesting too, whenever these sort of things happen and there's the analysis, the investigation and the debriefing of the procedures that were in place. It's really fascinating to look at that with Apollo 13 as well. Like we talk about the Teflon coating around the wires that were inside the oxygen tank, wires that if frayed could spark, which could ignite the oxygen, but it was the only way that they could have these tanks with zero G and the pressures of space reacting with oxygen in these tanks.
That's right. So many things just have to go wrong. And they're complicated machines. I always say, think about how many things go wrong in your car. And it's fairly simple by comparison in a normal environment. Airplane checks, they do it all the time. Think about how many checks they have to do. All these little things go into it. And here, these are huge machines with lots of complicated parts in harsh environments. And they have to get it to work. And they don't test one of a million configurations, and that's the one that goes wrong eventually.
And of course, the 3 astronauts couldn't survive in the command module, so they had to move to the lunar module, which obviously wasn't going to be used for a landing now. And that lunar lander wasn't designed to ferry 3 astronauts on a return trip to Earth. It was designed to obviously land on the moon. So there were even more problems that arose that NASA ingenuity, human ingenuity, had to come up with problems. Simple things like the difference in the oxygen scrubbers, square to round in the different modules.
Yeah, trying to make that the lunar module designed for, as you said, 2 people for 2 days to 3 people for 4 days. That's a difference of 4 days of use to 14 days of use, or 12 days of use. That's actually a lot. Imagine that, you have enough toilet paper for 4 days and you actually need 12 days of toilet paper, something we're all coping with in toilet paper shortages here.
I was just going to say that was very relevant.
It is, right? They had to think on their feet. There, as you said, critical things like making there was enough oxygen, not only cleaning, scrubbing the carbon dioxide, but creating enough oxygen to keep them going. How to do that? The heating. The food and water was less because there was always enough to get them there and back. But some of those other environmental conditions that the lunar module wasn't really designed to cope with, they had to make work. So definitely a big thing.
It is just absolutely incredible. We were talking yesterday about trigonometry in space, the sheer size in the calculations to do this. And, you know, with all of the Apollo missions, it was all planned out. It was all done months in advance, not when the astronauts were struggling to work out how they were going to get home. And even little things, and of course, all of my knowledge comes from the 95 Tom Hanks movie, but little things like weight calculations. They expected the re-entry with moon rocks. Obviously, they didn't have moon rocks.
Exactly, that's right. So all these little things, the precision of actually doing the fly around or the slingshot around the moon, you have to be, you know, I wouldn't say quite centimeter precision, but pretty close to it. Because if you go just slightly too close or too far, you don't come around far enough, or you come too close and you crash into the lunar surface. You know, even if they got slingshot around the moon and headed back to Earth, but they still missed the Earth, that's, you know, not a good thing either, right? You know, there were so many things they had to do to get it right. And as you said, the weight, you know, they had to plan all those changes. They didn't expect to actually have the lander on it, right? Because the lander was going to be left behind. So this whole hunking piece of equipment wasn't going to be there. So there were so many different things they didn't expect to have. And this was a geologically focused mission. In fact, even in the mission patch, Apollo 11 was all about landing on the moon. Apollo 12 was precision landing on the moon. Apollo 13 was starting to get to the science of the moon. And that's what it was. So they had a big plan of moon rocks and all sorts of things that didn't come back. And if you come in too fast, and it did come in on the faster end, Apollo 13 reentry, you burn up, you know, to be point frank, right? You know, that's what happens, unfortunately. So you can't mess up.
It's an ever-present danger for space travel, but when things go wrong, there's really no margin for error at all. It's life or death.
That's right. They tend to go horribly wrong, you know, and that's what happened here. And that's why I do like the movie Apollo 13. I think it's a very well done film, and it's because I'm not one of these people who always needs accuracy in movies. I think there's a lot of good reason why science fiction should have some inspiration and not reality to it. But in this case, the story was so fantastic itself, you didn't need to embellish it. Like, obviously, you have to shorten some things because you can't put 7 days of stuff into a film. But it was so dramatic, and what they did was so amazing. It didn't need embellishment, and I'm glad they chose that direction. You know, Jim Lovell, the astronaut, when he saw Apollo 13, because they did a screening for the astronauts and people associated with it before the movie was released to see if they had any comments. And Jim Lovell said it was at times like doing the real thing. The instrument control panel was the exact same. Some of the clothing beyond the astronauts and paintings and these little subtle details were right. And as we said, even the audio transcript was essentially used in the film. It gives it that realism that shows how important and how incredible the actual story is, which is why people know it. And I think that's a good thing. You know, people know the success of Apollo 11, and that's important. But people also know what happens when things go wrong, and the other good side of creativity in space. We always talk about space as being this way of challenging yourself, so we get really cool discoveries and technology, but it also forces and gets the best out of people, because these things are, as you said, so life and death, and so to the precision, it works. And I think that's a great thing to tell as well.
Well, it's been a Bradathon week here on Trekzone. Thanks for diving in with us on the space and science stories of the week. Be sure to like, follow, and subscribe to Trekzone across social media. Just search for Trekzone and smash that button. On YouTube, ring the bell to get notifications. Give us a like, leave a comment, all that good stuff, because I like seeing the notifications. It's been real. Brad will be back next week for more Talking Science, and on Monday, Lee Sargent will be talking Star Trek Picard.